Hello everybody. We're meeting again in our Tuesday lecture. I think this is probably the last lecture before the summer holidays. So we will meet after the summer holidays for the next Tuesday lecture. Now, this lecture is going to be about biogeometry design, because as you know, biogeometry is anchored in design, and I'm an architect, so it's a core topic in biogeometry. So I'm going to divide this talk in three parts. First, I'll discuss concepts, then a bit of history, and then we will go into practical methods and disciplines and all that. So it will be three parts. The problem with a design lecture that is equally for people who do not know anything about biogeometry, as well as for advanced biogeometry students, is somehow to put information on those two levels, plus squeezing a subject that would need a couple of weeks at least, squeezing it into an hour. So you see the problem I have in front of me. But in an introductory lecture, we need to do that. We need to give things as simple and as short as possible. So I will try to do that with you now. Now, first of all, biogeometry is all about design related to life force and consciousness, because geometry is, geo is the earth, metry has to do with measurements of the earth. That means land survey, basically, as it was in ancient Egypt. And when you put geo with bio, you're moving to another dimension. You're moving from the physical to the subtle energy level. So biogeometry means measuring the life force of the earth. Bio here is a life force, and it includes consciousness, of course. And that makes the earth a living being. A living being, and in which we are part. We do not live on the earth, we live in the earth, because we live inside the atmosphere of the earth, which is part of the earth itself. So we are part of this living being, just as our immune cells or blood cells are part of our being. So when we act, we have to act according to the general laws of the being in which we are part. So we will start from there, looking at the language of nature. Now, imagine if you lived in a country that spoke a language, and you did not speak the language of that country. You would be pretty useless, because you wouldn't be able to communicate with others. Now, we live in nature, and there's a divine pen that keeps writing and drawing all those shapes in nature. It's a message, a subtle energy message, subtle energy information being constantly drawn in front of us, and unfortunately nobody reads. We cannot read. The only language we understand is the language between us and other humans. But that, while useful in a certain way, it's useless when it comes to the multidimensionality of life, because we are not part of nature. And if we are not part of nature, then sooner or later we will do harm to nature. Nature needs to be understood, and it is understood through the principles of its design language. So let us go further into the design language of nature and see what is different in this design language from other design languages that we use. Now, nature is sort evolving. There's continuous evolution of shapes in nature. There is life, shapes breathe, and they have a beginning, they grow and all that, and they decay, so there's a form of life. It's a continuous evolution of shape in nature. Now, we can say, but our cities are also in continuous evolution. Yes, a city or a home or anything has life inside it, because we are humans. So any shape that contains life in it is living in one way or the other. So in a city, it starts small as a small community, then it grows, it grows, it grows. So it is like, if you take it in time-lapse photography, it will be like an organism that is growing into the environment. Now, whether the quality of this growth is a second thing, but let's look at the fact that it is growing. At a certain size, it starts decaying. So every city has a life. You can call it an organism in a way. But is that nature's way? No. It is a way of growth, but it's a disease type of growth. It's not growing according to the laws of nature. Now, a city that grows in the laws of nature will have a sort of certain energy quality. Like, for example, when animals build their nests, or something like a bird that builds a nest, the nest will replenish the life force of the bird. So it acts as a sort of a harmonizing second body to the bird itself, and so it is in nature. So we have two aspects here. A living city, or living homes, or living communities, where the homes themselves replenish the life force of those inhabitants in it. And the other side, we have human-made communities that also grow, but they sort of dissipate the life force. They take the life force out of the community in there. So one is positively charging, the other is negatively depleting. So there is something wrong in the way we are going about building our civilization, our cities, and all that. We are depleting ourselves of life force. Now comes extra things like our information technology based on electromagnetic radiation. Radiation in the air, waves move like that. When waves move, they create heat. Heat creates a sort of dryness. So our systems on Earth, living systems on Earth, due to global warming, to which electromagnetic radiation is contributing. So this continuous warming of living systems on Earth means a reduction of water content. That's why we always need to drink water, and we can drink a lot of water, but our cells are not really profiting from that water, because I'm not drinking water just to have a physical water content. That's not the aim of having water. The water content in my body, the aim of it, it's a carrier of life force, carrier of living consciousness. So the whole idea here is having a lot of water with reduced life force is pretty useless. We need water that has life force, that replenishes, because positive life force is a way of helping growth. You need to have positive energy, you need to have positive life force to grow. And this is where we have to look at the design language of nature, try to understand it. In nature, we have to see how things grow, how life force interacts with natural shapes. The moment we mention life force as a major component in the development and growth of natural shapes, we enter into multidimensionality of nature's design language. It's not a design language that acts in the physical world. No, it's a design language that is multidimensional. So for example, if I want to contain a liquid, I design my cup in a way that contains this liquid. If it's a flat surface, it won't contain it, so it has to be designed in a certain way to contain it. Okay, that's containing physical matter. Now, we want to contain the full life force. The full life force in nature has so many levels. It has vitality levels, it has emotional levels, it has mental levels, and all levels are different levels of consciousness at the same time, and there are all the laws of nature are working through all those levels. So here we are dealing with a physical shape that contains multidimensionality of subtle energy levels. That means the physical shape is only a very small part of the total living shape in nature. Now, how can it contain, how can a physical shape contain things that are elusive to it? The only way that it can do it is through resonance. And resonance, we should understand that in with a musical instrument, string instrument, for example, if you hit one string, every eighth string or every string with double or half its length will resonate with it. So the law of resonance goes from 0 to infinity. The law of resonance, when things are in resonance, there is a sort of bidirectional information exchange. And this information is how this energy affects us, meaning that it's qualitative. So qualities, as we know, for example, musical notes are an effect on us, they are qualities. Sounds are qualities. And we know that they repeat themselves on the different octaves. So that means a quality actually exists in all levels of nature from 0 to infinity. Qualities are different than quantities. Quantitative aspects are limited to certain ranges, while qualitative aspects are universal. Any quality in the universe is multidimensional. So here, the shape itself on a physical level is designed in such a way that every angle in that shape resonates with a certain level of subtle energy that's invisible. So certain principles, design principles that we're going to look at in the design of shape will make this shape resonate with emotions, with mental levels, with spiritual levels, or with vitality. And we have those shapes, those geometrical shapes that resonate with all those levels. We can use them in biogeometry to access information on all those levels, either to find disturbances on the different levels or to correct them, disturbances on the different levels. So we have our sort of shape codes for the different subplanes of nature, and we have rulers on which we can detect everything on the subplanes of nature. That is why when we are studying the multidimensionality of nature's design language, we actually have the practical tools of doing the research. Now, how does something physical connect to the higher dimensions? Now, the resonance is achieved. The resonance with higher dimensions is achieved. The connection happens through vortices. So you have a vortex like that connects between every dimension. So if I draw here, if this is one dimension, physical dimension, and then I have a vortex like this vortex can connect to another dimension. And you can have a third dimension and so on. So those vortices, they're bidirectional spirals. They connect between planes of nature. So while this one is our visible plane of nature, these are invisible planes of nature, the higher planes of nature. They're invisible. So every natural shape here, imagine this thick line to be a natural shape in nature, has this multidimensional connectivity all the way to an archetypal level here. An archetypal level. The archetypal level is a level where the patterns or the templates of all shapes are stored. And so the templates, the energy templates, come down here and govern the shaping of this shape here, in whatever shape. It is governed by the shapes. We call that the archetypal dimension. You have the human template, you have the plant template, you have the tree templates, and all those are communicated down here. They are communicated through emotional levels, mental levels, and so on. All those levels are consciousness levels. They come down here. So there is growth. But there's one thing we should understand. We spoke about water. The water content here that we see here is only the physical water. But actually, water has all those higher dimensions in water that connect all the way up to the beginning of creation, where we have what we call the primordial sea, the primordial fog. So this water is multidimensional. So when we speak about primordial water, it exists within normal water. Water that is connected will have all those levels of consciousness of life force. That's why life force is contained in water, because it is actually, you see physical water, but there are so many higher levels within it that contain this life force. Of course, your tap water has a break somewhere here and will not go beyond that, so it will be sort of dead water. it has to be reconnected to be to have the full life force. So the water in our body has the full life force. It cannot be completely cut of the life force, but what can happen is through many effects on the physical level, the water can sort of become depleted. The connection with the higher levels can become clogged in some areas, can become weaker in some areas. So that means that the BioGeometry design language has to find a way of generating natural shapes that include vortices coming from higher dimensions. And that's how natural shapes are. They are completely interconnected between dimensions. Now, this interconnectivity brings life force here in water. Now, let us imagine what happens when I have something here that has no water content. So let's say I have a rock, or I have a seed, or I have anything, and it has no water content. That means that it has no life force, which is not really true, because it might not have this water content on that level. But everything in nature, even if it's inanimate, like rocks and things like that, they have all the other levels. And then when this level, the physical water level is given to it, they connect to the higher levels. When it's given to a seed, it connects to higher levels. When it's given to earth, earth starts showing the energy of life in its clay, and so on. So this gives you the concept of the natural design language that has to primarily deal with a sort of creating vortices that connect to higher dimension. There's a form of multidimensional or three-dimensional rotation involved in there. So if we look at natural shapes, we will find that every natural shape has those centers. So even a human being, let us look at a human being. I get my friend here, this is a statue, and we've dealt with this in our courses. Now, I can actually measure centers of rotation on the statue. I have centers of emission of life force. Now, the centers of emission of life force are related in a way to the shape. Like we said, the shape of the container connects to all the higher levels, and it connects that through the vortices. So in a human being, we have 7 major vortices here that we call the chakras. One on the head, here, and heart chakra, stomach chakra, procreation chakra, base chakra, and then we have some other chakras above and some other chakras below. Now, if I can measure the chakras, those vortices, on a statue, it means that the shape creates the connective vortices to all the higher dimensions. Now, a statue on a physical level is not alive, but through its shape, it contains all the other dimensions. So actually, a statue can be a container of all the higher dimensions and transmit them. I can take them from the statue, transmit them to me. So I can actually interact with the chakras of the statues. This means that chakras are basically a result of a forming process. We have a law that says subtle energy formed or shaped produces function. So when we look at natural shapes, like let's go a bit inside the body and see how an open energy system like the human being interacts with subtle energy outside. Subtle energy, that means life energy, exists outside. Now life energy is drawn in. I draw it, let's say, through my breath. I draw in and out. When I draw in life energy, it goes into the lungs. Now, the lungs are shaped to produce the life energy in such a way that to sort of give it a certain function. So the energy is formless. The subtle energy comes in with all the functions together. Now every time they have to be rearranged in such a way optimal for the function they produced, and that happens through the shaping of the body, how the lungs shape the subtle energy to produce the energy needed on that level. Let's say the stomach will do it in a different way. The energy coming into the heart will do it in a different way. So the shape of every organ will give subtle energy the functions that are needed to be produced on the physical level. And at the same time, those shapes create the vortices needed for the multidimensionality of interacting with energy, because you need, when you breathe energy, your lungs, the shape of your lungs should actually be fine-tuned to all the levels of subtle energy. Otherwise it will lack. It should be fine-tuned to vitality, to emotions, to mental, to spiritual. So the design of the shape of the lung will act with all those levels to produce the needed function. So in a statue here, I can actually, since there are functions related to the shape of the body, I can activate one or the other, make it stronger than the other. So let's say if I move the center of balance of the shape like that on the heart level, see, on the heart level like this, I will accentuate this chakra. On a stomach level, accentuate this chakra. On this level, accentuate this chakra. So here we understand that the chakras are shape related, form related. They are created on the physical level through the forming process on the physical level to connect, so that the forming process creates chakras, energy wheels, that produce multidimensional vortices that connect with the higher levels and bring down life energy into the shape. So it is all about making living energies. Now, we have a problem in our civilization. When we developed modern science, we excluded the human being from all our experiments because we thought that the human being is too subjective, too opinionated, and things like that. And subjectivity gives very complex variables in any experiment. But it doesn't mean that they cannot be studied, those complex variables. We can go into them. But it makes things so complicated, having a subjective effect in creating a physical experiment, that we decided to keep the human being out of our scientific experiments. So we developed a scientific world, we developed modern technology with the human being out of it. So what should have been done? I mean, when I have a formula, any formula, whether I'm building a chip or building anything, if I add the human variable to it, but that means I'm adding emotional, mental, spiritual concepts, I'm adding subjectivity, I'm adding all those things in the formula. Yes, we should have a sort of a dynamic variable in there that contains so many secondary variables in it that reflect the subtle energy of life, that reflects life force. So life force becomes a major variable in the formula of our scientific experiments or in our scientific worldview. Then we would be building a civilization for human beings or for living beings. But what we are doing now is we have created a very advanced civilization that gives ultimate leisure and pleasure to humanity, while at the same time being at the cost of the human being. So you see, there's something wrong in this formula. We are building a civilization that depletes life energy. That means our civilization is sucking out the life energy out of the living systems in nature. And that means reduced life energy means reduced immunity. That means as we go along, as civilization advances, immunity is reduced, and we end up with so many types of pandemics that will actually sooner or later end life on Earth. Now, we should restore a sort of a design language that brings back life energy into things. We cannot build products that do not acknowledge life force, so they are dead products, and then we put them in the body of the Earth where all the components are connected to life force, are living components. What we have here now is sort of dead rubbish. I'm sorry to call all the products of modern technology dead rubbish, but in a way, from a life force point of view, they are like putting dead matter in a living body. And the more dead matter you keep putting in the living body, the more you reduce its life force, the more you reduce its immunity until you bring its demise. Now, I don't think that the greater Earth being will wait till humanity can really create a major disturbance in the Earth. At some level, the Earth will just hit back and completely erase humanity from its life system, and maybe a new living species will come and do something better. So we have to now design in order to bring life force into all our products. Now, I'm going to go a step further and ask myself, is this a new concept, or is it only something that has to do with our modern civilization? Now, can I find examples where humanity respected life force and sort of imitated the forming process of nature, imitated the animals, imitated all those divine laws and put them in their creations. So let us go back in history and see, because many people think that I can create life or can create life force through artificial intelligence. Now, while artificial intelligence can create very advanced mental capabilities that will by far surpass our human minds, so that one day we'll have artificial intelligence running everything in our civilization, and it can even go so far as push us aside because our very comparatively weak mental capabilities will be a sort of always in the way of the perfection of artificial intelligence. So humanity will be taken out of all decisions that have to do with life. We'll just put humanity out. But those decisions that have to do with life are not really life decisions, because the mental capabilities of artificial intelligence are only a simulation of life, but they do not contain life. So what happens is, if you are not connected to life force, you are not connected to all the laws of nature. So you will have computers that do not have any ethical values, because the laws of nature bring balance into our physical world through a translation from the right brain to the left brain, and they emerge as ethical values. So computers will not have ethical values. If they decide one day to get rid of humanity in order to have a better functioning technology, they'll do it. So artificial intelligence, the way we are following it, is not the way, and the question is why? Because life energy cannot be produced with artificial intelligence. Life energy must be accessed. We look at it that way, that the background cradle of life since the beginning of creation is consciousness with all the universal laws that we call life energy. That is the background, holistic, subtle energy in which everything lives. So you don't look for life force. We're swimming in it. It's like if a fish is looking for water, while it is swimming in the water, it's looking for water, it wants to invent water, because it does not think that everything is water. So we have this same problem. Life, we live in life energy. Life is out there, and life has to be accessed. Now the ancients, somehow, from the first emergence or dawn of humanity on Earth, they sort of had an intuitive interaction with life, because primitive humanity were actually based, or their focus of perception was based on the right brain perception. That means the language of the heart, right brain perception. That is not the sensory left brain perception. So actually they had a very weak ego, a very weak sensory perception, and they were really focused in the inner life. So on that level, they were one with everything in nature. They did not see the oneness of nature. No, they were part of the oneness of nature. They did not look at life force. No, they were part of the life force. So they could acknowledge or understand the workings of life force from its core, from the inner vision of that life force, from inside it. They don't have to go outside and watch it. They were part of it. So primitive humanity identified the communicative vortices of life force out there in nature. They saw the tree communicating with multidimensionality through a sort of a vortex. Now, the tree had its roots in somehow connected to underground water, and its leaves up there in the sky, and there was this multidimensionality in the tree. Now, they found exactly the same concept as in the tree. They found it in a sacred power spot, or what became sacred power spot to them. They found that there are spots on Earth that had the underground water crossings of underground streams in the rocky strata of the Earth, and their crossings produced this vortex. So you had the exact energy configuration of a natural object, of a tree, in certain locations on Earth, and they could be identified by when the crossings of underground streams they somehow produced this vortex and pushed streams on the surface. So now we have streams pushed on the surface, connected all the way up. That means full life force, water with full life force in those areas that became special power spots to them. They started bringing menhirs, large stones, putting them in there, 40-ton granite megalithic stones that actually had a high quartz content that resonated with this life force and could actually spread it around. Then they created those gate shapes, the dolmens, 2 megalithic shapes, and on it they put a horizontal one that looks like a gate, and they directed it to the east-west to connect it to the energy of life, to the life cycles. So now they understood life force and life cycles. That is before any civilization. That's primitive caveman. Later on, this developed into the menhir developed into obelisks, where they brought the laws of mathematics and geometry to the shape, and the dolmen, this gate shape, became the archetypal shape of the Holy of Holies in all religious buildings throughout history. So you had, for example, from the beginning, they had this inner chamber, and they put an earth mound on it. Later on, pyramids. Then they started building all those architectural edifices with the Holy of Holies inside the temple. So it is from the beginning, humanity was actually putting the heart of its building, the Holy of Holies, its building, which brought in life force part. They put it in their design of the building, and they located the building on a life force spot on Earth, so that they could have a sort of a human building. They built it in the same way that nature sort of forms a tree. So they formed their temple. They formed everything in such a way that the natural forces, the life forces, came into it. So they would call those temples the houses of the netters. Netters mean nature forces, or erroneously named gods. So they would say houses of the gods. So they brought in all natural forces into their buildings. So they were designing actually all their products in the same natural way, along the same natural principles as nature was designing. So they were actually speaking the language of nature. When you acknowledge nature in your designs, you are speaking the language of nature. You're already communicating on a subconscious level with nature. So speaking the language of nature is a sort of using the intellect of the heart to communicate with nature in a subconscious level. So you would be walking in nature and completely exchanging information with plants, with animals, with all things in nature, because you were part of that nature. That is the natural forming process that has been practiced actually by humanity for many, many ages until a few hundred years ago. A few hundred years ago, we completely forgot about the placement of our religious edifices or things like that, or the designing of our cities according to those sacred power spots. We completely forgot those things. Why did you forget them? Because about 1200 BC, as William James states it, there was the complete shift of awareness into left brain consciousness. So the door closed to the subconscious. The door closed to the language of nature. So while humanity had an open door where it could speak to the language of nature or with nature, now it closed the door. The subconscious was so excluded, it even became an enemy. And so the ego now, without the ethical values, without the laws of the subconscious controlling it, as when the center of perception was right there, when it was in the right brain, somehow it was controlled by all those laws of nature. Now it comes out of it goes into the left brain, and it is completely free of control of all the laws of nature. So now the sensory perception is master. It creates the sensory personality, the sensory ego, and it's an ego created by sensory information, and a data bank created by sensory information must ultimately at the end serve the senses. And sometimes by serving the senses, because the human being on the left brain has also gotten a new thing that it didn't have in the right brain or in the heart. It had now freedom of choice. This freedom of choice that had made it actually go further into satisfying the senses beyond the sort of balancing laws of the right brain side or the heart that balanced the interaction with the senses. No, now we had full freedom and we could indulge in the pleasure of the senses, creating a sort of an imbalance in all our activities and productions. And this imbalance ends in so many, in greed, in the way we look at things, and a complete disrespect of the earth, of nature and all that, so that at the end the left brain is a mask that completely masks our real inner permanent self or immortal soul, and we are trapped in this mortal soul that makes us see things completely detached from the laws of nature, so automatically life force, we live in it, but we don't acknowledge it. And we live in the air, we don't acknowledge the air. How would that be if you don't acknowledge that there's air out there? But because you breathe it, because it's a level, you know it. But its content, its life force content, the content of the universe, because life force exists everywhere in all the multidimensionality of the universe. So if you're looking for, is there life in other planets? Is there life? This is a very stupid question to ask. Is there life somewhere else? Because all those planets are based in life force. It's the opposite. Everything is based in life force. So the question is, what forms of life are out there? Life need not be a physical electromagnetic life based on electromagnetic particles as we have here. You could have life based on emotional particles, life based on mental particles that would be invisible to us but would be solid in their own dimensions. So now that we have seen how the ancients respected life force, now when they built their city, they had to make their city replenish the life force of all its inhabitants. So they placed all the main buildings on their power spots, on the sacred power spots. And in those main buildings, this would be sort of everything important in their life was placed there. Whether it was the hospital, it was the temple, it was the ruler's palace, or it was the marketplace, or things like that, they were all placed on power spots. And then they were connected through avenues so that the balancing life force would flow along the avenues, so that when people walked from one place to another, they actually, through walking, they sort of help the movement of life force along those avenues. And then it came to the secondary roads that went into the homes and all that. They were done in such a way that those main avenues would sort of give life force to the secondary roads to go into every home in the community. Now you had a city that replenishes the life force of all its inhabitants. We have a city that is alive, but positively alive. It's a very healthy being that's alive. And the cells in it will also be very healthy. The cells, meaning us, will be very healthy in it. Nature will thrive in it. That is in contrast to cities that grow with a depleting life force. So let's go now to the third aspect. Let's look at some of the principles of the biogeometry design language. So the first thing that would come to mind, that somewhere in our design we need to create some form of rotation, because we just spoke about the vortex. So the centers of shape should be there. Centers of shape can be even more activated three-dimensionally through rotation. So rotation becomes a main aspect of creating shapes along, let's say, the language of nature. So all or many of the principles of design would one way or the other be based on rotation. Rotation does not have to be dynamic. You do not have to rotate figures. For example, I do not have to keep rotating this cup to give life force. Of course, if I rotate the cup a bit like this, I'd be giving it life force. Clockwise, I'd be giving it life force. If I to have strong life force in there, I could actually, instead of giving big rotations, one way is to make 8 notches like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 notches. This would start the vortex, and now the liquid becomes multidimensional and full of life force. I can use some of the biogeometry numbers that we'll look at now as we go along, and I could stir 16 times or 19 times or rotate 16 times in order to replenish the life force. But it all has to do with rotation. Now, rotation does not have to be physical like this. It could be virtual. So if I'm looking at this cup and I have a handle here, there's not much rotation. But if this handle was twisted a bit like this, its angle was a bit twisted to one side, it would automatically produce a virtual rotation of the cup. So just designing a cup with a handle that is slightly twisted to the left so that it produces a clockwise rotation. So now I would have designed my cup in such a way that it has virtual rotation. So I can just put the liquid in it and it's already having virtual rotation of the cup. So this is a type of rotation. In general, any change of direction will produce a center. And when I produce a center, that means I produce a vortex. So when you're walking, any curve you take, in any design, any curve you do, will produce a center. But the whole idea is how to work with those curves. So one way is creating centers with the curves. You can do multiple centers. Usually you would create your curve clockwise if it's only one curve, but if it's more, you could sort of have clockwise and then anti-clockwise motion within it and so on. You can play with both together. But then there are other ways of achieving this sort of rotation. Anything that creates an axis, a three-dimensional axis, means that axis means it's capable of rotation because there's an axis. So an axis is a sort of a wormhole in a way. So we know, for example, in biogeometry that we can create axes in so many ways. If I have something like this, this is just a square on a flat surface. Now, what if I do this? I've created an inner path. That means I've created an axis that actually goes this way. You see, goes through the shapes. I've created an axis. So this axis is a sort of creates a certain rotation in there. Of course, I could do this and make it more effective by rotating this square under this one. Okay, this would be giving two things, two principles, creating an axis and rotation of the shape. So very simple things like this could bring in life force. Sometimes Just if I have a square house like this, and I come on the outside and put something, any shape here in the ground, could be a bench, could be a flower box like this, could be anything here. That means the shape is turning that way. I can put another, to accentuate it, put another one here, and then I would accentuate it. So very simple to rotate the shape. If I have, like I said earlier, this is my cup from the top, and the handle is here of the cup. All I have to do is rotate the handle a bit. If this is the center and here, so I would here, if I just rotate it a bit like this, see this rotation, it would automatically produce a virtual rotation here. So virtual rotations can be done in so many ways. I'm not going to go through all the design principles and teach them here, but basically we have principles like rotation, we have principles like a sort of a transparency principle where I make a grid, for example, of a house. I start making shapes like that. It's putting order into something, and then I design accordingly. I put a wall here, let's say, and then I have another one here, and maybe here I have a wall, and then I have this wall here, and something like this. And then afterwards, that would be just the basis, just the grid through which I created the shape at the end. So you see, like this or like this here, and I could have this shape here. So imagine now this dotted grill doesn't exist anymore, and these are my shapes, but they are on that transparent order, those axes. So this we call transparency. Here it has the shifting and centering of several squares. So you have a main center here, you have secondary centers and all that. So we're using this shifting process here in a more elaborate form to produce this. And we use this a lot in architecture, where all the spaces are somehow based on an invisible grid that produces the centering effect. And this is called, we call that transparency. And so there are some forms of interfacing. For example, anytime you interface something like that, positive and negative, you see, you create centers, different centers. So interfacing, this is in nature, most borders of things in nature have this interfaced fractal, as we call fractal designs, going in and out, interfacing like that. That means we are creating small centers or small vortices here. Now, what if I have this and I want to get the optimal proportion here, or the optimal angle here, the optimal angle of rotation, or the optimum proportion of shifting. Now, some people tell me, okay, what if I have not learned using a pendulum and measuring and all that? So already if you use the principle, you're already introducing harmony, irrelevant of the proportion. But now, if you introduce any biogeometry proportion in there, or any of the musical proportions in there, you will fine-tune it so that it becomes very potent. So for example, if I have, I can use the 1 to 1.6, for example. That's the golden mean. Or 1.432, 1 to 1.432, that's square root of 2. So square root of 2 is, in general, most of those proportions are based on irrational numbers. Or use any of the biogeometry numbers. These are numbers that if you put like that in dots, those number of things, they will automatically produce the sacred energy or balancing energy of a power spot. We call this energy BG3. Because, why do we call it BG3? Because we detected it with the pendulum using 3 main criteria that we find in all its occurrences, and that's gold and ultraviolet and a sort of a carrier wave called negative green or somewhere middle gray. So you can use the proportions with the principles in order to create more fine-tuning to accentuate the energy. So we use proportions. We have tables that in biogeometry that you can use. You have them in my first book called Modular. Then you can use the quality of numbers. For example, if you have a number of windows like that, sitting in front of each window will give you a different secondary energy quality. The main energy quality will be the quality of, let's say, if there are 5 windows, will be the energy quality of number 5. That will be the main energy quality of the number 5. But then here I would have the energy quality of number 3 plus 5. So here 3 plus 5. So I have an energy quality here. Here I would have, or here let's say, I would have the energy quality of 4 if I'm counting from there, plus 5. Or if I'm counting from here, I'd have 2 plus 5. So I have here a composite energy quality of 2, 4, and 5. Here I have 3 and 5 because it's in the middle. This would be again the same as this from the other side. So I can see in relationship to my activity which is the number quality that suits best my activity. So you can use things like that in architecture. I won't go into too many details here because we can go on forever. But what the whole idea of me showing you some of the design principles here is to let you know that it is very easy to apply such design and to bring in life force into whatever you do. There's nothing easier than bringing in life force into your products if you understand the principle of life force. And this is as far as I will go today on introducing the biogeometry design language. And basically it's BioGeo. Basically is designing in order to replenish the life force. Every tree that has life force will have a certain halo around it with positive life force. because life force will always create a certain boundary, a certain area that has energizing area. And then beyond that, it will be balanced by a depleting area. That's what you call the depleting area is entropy. The energizing one would be negative entropy or neg entropy. Now, if you design your cup accordingly, or whatever you design accordingly, it will do that. If I rotate that with 8 notches here like this, I have created an area, not only in it, but an energizing area around it, and then the depleting area there. So that is why in any biogeometry design, we will also have an energizing environmental effect around it. Just like we go and like to sit near a tree or something like that, because there is a certain area around all natural things that is energizing. So let consciousness and life force be our guiding light in all forms of biogeometry design, because this is actually what is being taken away from us in our modern civilization and is leading to all the health problems that we have, all the pandemics that we have. And now with pandemics we are facing, this becomes a sort of more important than anything else to restore life force. It is not difficult. We can actually, in biogeometry, we have shown that we can restore the life force in many regions. We did that in many regions in Switzerland when working with the Swiss government, and we restored the life force that of people who complained of problems of electrosmog. When we restored the life force that was depleted by electromagnetic radiation, they called that the miracle of Hamburg and the miracle of Hirschberg, because even the psychic makeup of people changed. Peace prevailed in there. Aggression faded away. Health of plants, animals, and human beings was restored. So restoring life force is speaking the language of nature, is saving humanity and taking it into a golden age. Now, I thank you very much and hope to see you after the holidays.